Former Galveston Mayor and Democratic candidate for Texas Attorney General Joe Jaworski. Thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Thank you, Jack. It's great seeing you again.
Good to see you. So this is your second time running for Attorney General. Why do you think it will be different, and what is the essence of your campaign?
It will be different because I'm a more mature candidate. Having experienced the 2022 loss, I immediately endorsed my primary opponent and was sorry to see her lose in the 22 general election. Well, since that time, Jack, I have been what you might call a loyal Democrat, supporting Democrats in office and in the 24 cycle, and being a heard Democrat with a voice. I've written op-eds in all the major publications, including the Dallas Morning News and the Houston Chronicle, Austin American-Statesman, San Antonio Express News. I've had a radio show, believe it or not. This has helped me develop a voice that I think is well known now in Texas. So I think, where it really matters, Jack, this time around, people are going to know Joe Jaworski. Also, it seems like what's old is new again. The mantra, if you will, of my campaign is going to be that corruption is bad for Texas, and we need public servants who will serve the public, not politicians who serve themselves. And so what I want voters to know is Joe Jaworski is running for Texas Attorney General. I will never lie to you. I can't be bought, and I have your back.
And you talk about corruption, and are you talking about the existing, in what context are you referring to corruption? Obviously it's against the law, but how do you define it, and how does it relate to your campaign?
Well, it is the Attorney General's province to be the lead lawyer and, in a way, counselor for the entire state. It breaks my heart to see that state government has become akin to the Spanish Inquisition, picking winners and losers, while at the same time it has adopted a pay-to-play type experience.
How
Examples that donors who have millions of dollars that would be a rounding error to their finances are able to pay capital sums to legislators and executives in order to achieve access. I see this with the way Dan Patrick received $3 million, one in an actual contribution and $2 million in an actual forgivable loan. We never heard the terms of that, Jack, 5 weeks before sitting as the judge in Ken Paxton's impeachment trial, an appearance of impropriety to be sure. And then there were several decisions made in that trial that affected the outcome. Decisions made or led by the judge, the lieutenant governor. Now, we have just heard reports about the governor of the state of Texas using his proclamation power to issue emergency proclamations that suspend the competitive bidding rules so that he can issue no bid contracts to some of his donors. This is shocking, and it has the tendency of depressing people's appreciation for government and turning them against the government. So what I'd like to see is the Attorney General lead as a public servant who would then restore confidence in the government. So that's going to be one of the mantras of my candidacy and my incumbency should I be elected.
So based on what you just said involving the governor, if you were Attorney General, what would you do about it?
Well, I would absolutely bring it to the attention of the courts that the constitutional power to issue a proclamation declaring an emergency every 30 days for now years is something that needs to be stopped. I would, as Attorney General, want to have a conversation with the governor first, of course, and say, is this really necessary? Because right now, contracts are being bid without bidding, and contracts are being awarded without bidding, and that is not a good thing for the taxpayer. It also depresses confidence in government, and this is something that has a long reach, Jack. So I would do something, obviously, first person to person, but then use the courts if necessary.
And before we get into more on the policy, I do want to ask you, you're again in a primary, and so why should Democratic voters go with you over Nathan Johnson?
They should absolutely vote for me over Nathan Johnson, because if they're Democrats, they need to vote for a true Texas Democrat. I will be the choice that is presented. Nathan Johnson is a senator. He has been in Dan Patrick's bubble now for several years, and his votes show it, Jack. Number one, you can't have a Democrat as Attorney General who has said on the record in the 24 cycle that he would not support Democrats running against his Republican colleagues because it wouldn't be effective. That's a quote from Senator Johnson in his own words. Also, was he being effective when he voted to acquit Ken Paxton on 2 charges, one of which involved the whistleblower complaints? I mean, really? The question before a senator is yes or no. We know that the whistleblowers were telling the truth. It's going to be absolutely imperative that we have an Attorney General who understands what it is to be a Democrat. I'll also point out that Mr. Johnson was one of 2 Democrats who voted in favor of the Texas Campus Security Act, which is a really lovely name for something that squelches all students' freedom of speech. And it's this law that Governor Abbott just signed that is causing Texas students to have to sue to restore their rights. It shocks me that a Democrat joined all the Republicans and voted for this sort of thing, because right now our educational institutions are under assault, and we know that the Republican elected class are the ones going after our teachers and our students. As Attorney General, you need to know you have a Democrat who will fight back against those bullies.
And give me an example of what you're talking about.
What I am talking about is the Texas Campus Security Act.
Right, but as far as, as far as people gathering, people being able to protest, I mean, lay it out for me.
Well, how about the University Democrats, where I was privileged to speak several weeks ago? They just got an email from the Dean of Students saying you have to now ask for permission to have any guests speak before you, and we will decide whether they're allowed to or not. It also, apparently, if read in its exact language, would forbid anybody from speaking on campus after 10 p.m. Now, that's obviously an absurd interpretation, but because it was so poorly written, that is one of the results. You can't now express yourself in a way that you can confidently expect you won't be summoned in the Dean of Students' office. This is not how to run an educational system. Our Tier 1 universities are the targets, especially University of Texas. And so, Jack, every time you hear these Republican politicians saying woke culture or some other, ad hominem attack on one of the great institutions of American freedom, which is education, you have to ask yourself, are you for the schools or are you against it? As Attorney General, I will be a voice of reason, and I will make sure that our educational institutions operate free from harassment.
And what I find interesting is that if you win, you'll be a Democrat, the first elected Democrat in over 30 years. And you will have to work with likely other Republicans, the Republicans. And so I'm wondering, how would you approach that? And how would you defend a state law that you disagree with?
Yeah, so this would be something incredibly refreshing to have a Democrat in the state club, because that's how they look at it right now. I mean, you can imagine the level of conversations that Patrick, Paxton, and Abbott have. I mean, for all I know, they're not close at all, but the reality is they all have each other's back. What would happen if there was a change in atmosphere, if you had a Democrat in the Texas Attorney General's office? Look, I, as a former mayor, am very fair. I know how to work with people of all persuasions. It was not partisan when I was mayor of Galveston. We were rebuilding a city that everybody loves. And I was able to use lots of federal money and lots of personal political persuasion power, if you want to call it that, to get things done. As Attorney General, if I were serving with Republicans, such as Lieutenant Governor or Governor, I would be very fair. I'm a professional attorney. I have been for 35 years. My family has a good reputation. And so I think we'd start with that. I would enjoy personal relationships with them. But when it comes to actually doing the job of Attorney General, I'm not the governor's lawyer, and they know this. I'm not the legislature's lawyer. I'm actually would be serving as an independent, constitutional, elected executive who is the people's lawyer. And so I would have my own sense and my own feelings about matters. You ask about how I would defend a law. Well, first things first, I would probably have my own opinion about it, and as I saw something going down the pike through what would I think be the 90th legislature, I might have some choice words about whether it was constitutional or wise to pass. So people will hear from the Attorney General as a Democrat for the first time in a long time who might be saying and speaking from a different script. But also remember, Jack, as an attorney, I took an oath of office alongside my wife when we graduated University of Texas Law School together 35 years ago. And what that oath says is you will protect and defend the Texas Constitution as well as the United States Constitution. Also, as a Texas attorney, the Supreme Court understands I am held to the Texas rules, the disciplinary rules of professional conduct. And Jack, I'm sure we've talked about this before. Rule 3.01 requires every attorney, when considering a representation, to use his or her own discretion and judgment as to whether the position they're taking is in good faith and or not frivolous. So if there's an unconstitutional law that the legislature has passed because they want to make a statement and appeal to their base, if it's unconstitutional, I won't support it. In fact, I'll work to undo it.
And how would you do that? I mean, is this something where you envision you are holding news conferences and getting the word out that way? And how would you try to undo it? Because if the Republicans are dominating the legislature again with their majorities, how is that going to work? I guess you would have to wait for them to pass the law, challenge it in court. Is that what you're saying?
You read my mind. I mean, first off, absolutely you would use your power of speech and use the constitutional executive office of the Attorney General. Now think about this. Ken Paxton is not seen on campuses very much. He's not seen out in the public. He goes on the TV shows that are friendly to him. What if you had a transparent Attorney General who was fearless in that regard and had transparency as the rule of thumb? So going to campuses, being on stations like yours, Jack, speaking to the public, and essentially humbling himself, because that is what a public servant should do, speaking and answering the questions. Then comes the question of, if it's passed into law, where do you stand? Well, we have the reliable social and legal organizations that typically bring suit against unconstitutional or illegal redistricting, or perhaps unconstitutional laws that bully the vulnerable. What if the Attorney General were on the side of the people instead of the side of the machine? So, you know, each case will require its own investigation and its own determination, but I can tell you that the Texas Attorney General has the capacity to sue to undo a law that the Texas legislature passes. Or, I mean, you saw that, right? I mean, Ken Paxton just did that on the Texas DREAM Act, a law that was passed in 2001, great policy that has survived hostile attacks every 2 years, even as recent as the 89th legislature, when a Republican supermajority nearly in the legislature said, no, we want dreamers to continue to be able to pay in-state tuition. Well, Pam Bondi files suit. Ken Paxton doesn't even answer the lawsuit. He actually signs a consent decree in front of the federal judge in the Northern District. So he just right there took good educational policy and cut it open. So I'm not saying that was anything I would ever do, but I would just point out to you that the Attorney General does have an independent view. In his case, it was fatal to good education policy. I would like to think that if there were an unconstitutional law passed, I would be siding with the people as opposed to an ideology.
I was just going to ask you, so if you were Attorney General at the time that the U.S. Justice Department filed suit against the state because of the in-state tuition that's been given to DACA recipients all these years, how would you have responded?
Well, I would have defended the lawsuit vigorously. I mean, I have to believe, Jack, that Ken Paxton and Pam Bondi were on the telephone talking about this. I mean, there was not even so much as 24 hours that passed between the time the lawsuit was filed and the consent decree was signed, so he had to know it was coming. So yeah, specifically on that, I would have defended DACA. That is something that's good policy. These are Texas residents who have a future here in Texas, and we want them to finish their education, dreamers. We want them to get good jobs and pay taxes and have their employers pay Social Security and Medicare taxes, be part of the system. It's always been the way in Texas. I'd like to see it preserved.
I suppose that you oppose the state's abortion ban, and you oppose the existing state of the state's gun laws. You would, I would imagine, would want more restrictions. Is that fair to say?
Well, those are two very different questions. Can I start with the abortion?
Uh-huh.
Well, certainly. I think that it is imperative that women have an equal right to decide when to start their families. And so I think the law does not provide for that. I also think there's a great flaw in the way they've gone about it. It's almost too cute and clever by half, which is to not allow the government to enforce it, but to let, as we call them, bounty hunters enforce it. Now think about that, Jack. Some smart guy came up with the idea that if we let strangers to the process enforce the penalty, well then nobody will know it's coming until they sue. So they can't get an injunction once the governor signs the bill. That is what Jonathan Mitchell came up with when they passed Senate Bill 8. And so now, for anybody to halt it in its tracks, you don't know who to sue because it isn't the government who's enforcing it. It's individual human beings, and so you have to wait for them to sue. Well, that's just, I think, against every regular precept that every attorney was taught about standing and common and procedural law. So I'm against the abortion law as a process as well as the substance. When it comes to guns, I like shooting guns. Okay, Texas is a gun state. You hear all the Democrats always saying this. So I'm trying to say something real, which is it enough after Uvalde? You know, the shooting that happened in Florida a year before Uvalde, if Texas had simply followed the national trend, which was to raise the age to buy a long rifle to age 21, just like we do for handguns, then it wouldn't have happened probably, because the horrible murderer who shot up the Uvalde school tried to get his sister to purchase a long rifle, in this case an AR-15, for him when he was 17, and she wouldn't do it. He waited till he was 18. The day later, he shoots the school up. There's a cause and effect there. What a shame that Texas didn't see the writing on the wall. That is a simple compromise that isn't going to deprive anybody of the fruits of their labor or the rights they have under the Second Amendment. It's just a good compromise for child safety. I'd like to see people feel confident that when they send their children to school, there's a good chance they'll survive classes.
The reason I ask is because how would you defend the state on a law that you disagree with?
Well, that is something that many lawyers know, the unpopular cause. It would have to, look, I would not want to make a habit out of saying, get your own lawyer, which is what Ken Paxton has done when it comes to Texas ethics rules or undoing the DREAM Act, right? But if it's a really, I mean, you'll just have to ask yourself, who do you want as Attorney General? This is a personal decision that you want to have a professional who will do his or her best to talk to the legislature in the process of drafting laws, but if it's something that's egregious and you've made yourself well known that you're against it, you're probably not going to defend it. And I think the Attorney General, I believe the Attorney General has the capacity to do that.
And with regards to guns, we've seen a lot of deadly shootings. We had the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We had the attempted assassination twice of President Trump. We've had the assassination of the Minnesota state senator and her husband. We've had Uvalde and other school shootings. We've had church shootings. So how do you prevent those, do you think?
That is an essential question. It is a very violent time. in our state and country right now. And Jack, as an attorney and as a candidate running for Attorney General, I don't know that you can shut them all down, but what you can do is create reasonable safeguards. I mean, don't you notice every time there's one of these shootings, then there's kind of a 2 to 3 week period where everyone's in shock and stumbling around trying to find a reason for why it happened. But then within a few months later, there's always something that somebody could have said or seen. I mean, I'm sure that there are think tanks and there are people smarter than me who have taken a look at these en masse and have said, look, these are the top 3 or 4 reasons that we're seeing for these shootings. And I think a lot of it is young people who have access to long rifles before they maybe have processed their rage. I mean, that's one thing that we can talk about. So that's one law that I think reasonable people support. Let's make AR-15s, long rifles, eligible for purchase when you're 21 and older, just like we do handguns. How about mental health? We need to make insurance pay mental health claims like we do physical injury claims. So that's another thing that the Attorney General can help in a grand scale, is to hold insurance accountable when it comes to paying claims for mental health. This is a obviously large question about how people access their health care. And then I think finally, we want to lower the rhetoric when it comes to what people say. You saw that Ken Paxton just the other day issued a press release where he wanted to alert the media that he had an undercover operation to root out leftist cells. Well, first off, you have to ask yourself, why are we having a press release to alert somebody about an undercover operation? Put aside the fact that he's running for the U.S. Senate. It's this kind of rhetoric that puts people in a mood to strike back. So I think those are 3 specific examples, I think, of how to reduce, certainly not eliminate, but reduce the level of violence we're seeing. Age restrictions on buying weapons, lowering the rhetoric, and then doing a better job, I think, in terms of being adults and parents and helping our children get the mental health care they need.
And we've seen a lot of controversy this week over Governor Abbott sending the Texas National Guard to Chicago. What do you think about that?
I think it's performative. It is too soon after Trump asking him to redistrict the state suddenly. I mean, it's starting to become a habit. So I think this idea of sending the Texas National Guard when they're not needed, where judges have already said that is not something that we do. Greg Abbott's a former jurist and a former attorney general, so he can't be doing it because he thinks the judges and the law provide for it. He's doing it, I think, as a performative matter to show he's tough, he's MAGA tough. So what do I think about it, Jack? I think that it is another example of our state leaders selling us out to Donald Trump. And I'll tell you why they're doing it. Because they're afraid of being denounced on Trump's Truth social media platform. That's no way to run a state government. So I'm really disappointed.
And if you were Attorney General, would there be anything you would do, or is that not something that you would feel like you'd be able to challenge?
Oh, I think I would challenge it.
Oh, you would?
Oh, sure. The Oregon Attorney General filed suit against Trump federalizing the Oregon National Guard. This is a little different because here you have the governor loaning our National Guard. What is it, 400 units, I think was the last count. Of course, this is after all that horror down at the border where we heard, regardless of what you think about whether we should have the National Guard down at the border, but you heard stories about people taking their own life because they were sent down there and were missing their opportunity to actually work and pay bills for their family. So this whole idea of just willy-nilly sending our men and women who are loyally serving our National Guard, and they are wonderful public servants, off to remote locations, kind of reminds me of bring our boys, and in this case, boys and girls back home. So the Attorney General can absolutely do something about that. I don't know that we want to have conflict on every single issue, but you got to remember, these Republican leaders in our state are the one making these choices. Whatever happened to small government, Jack? Whatever happened to letting people exercise their freedoms and having government have a light touch? What I'm seeing from Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, and Ken Paxton is anything but a light touch.
And my last question is there anything else that you would like to say about your campaign that I haven't asked you about?
Well, this campaign is robust, and we're getting all around the state. And you've asked a lot of great questions. Right now, we're in the Democratic primary, and I look forward to meeting as many Democrats all across the state. Because as I've said on my social media communications, if you want to be the Texas Attorney General, you need to get all around the state. And that's going to be the message should I be elected by the Texas voters in 2026 and in the primary on March 3rd, 2026, that you've got a Texas Attorney General who has your back, as opposed to one who's in office just to score political points. I think it's time for public servants to serve the public again.
Democratic candidate for Texas Attorney General Joe Jaworski, thank you so much.
Jack, thank you so much.
We appreciate it.